September 30th, 1888. At approximately 1:44 a.m., Police Constable Edward Watkins entered Mitre Square during his routine patrol through the City of London. 45 minutes earlier, the square had been empty. Now, beneath the dim glow of a gas lamp, he discovered the body of Catherine Eddowes. The streets were silent. The fog concealed the narrow passages leading out of the square. Whoever had done this had vanished. More than 135 years later, we still don't know who that person was. But perhaps that's not the reason this story has survived. For more than a century, investigators, historians, journalists, and amateur detectives have searched for one answer. Who was Jack the Ripper? Thousands of books have been written. Hundreds of documentaries have promised to solve the mystery. Even modern forensic studies continue to make headlines, claiming they may have finally identified the killer. Yet none has gained broad acceptance among historians. So maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the real mystery isn't who Jack the Ripper was. Maybe it's why we still can't stop looking for him. To answer that, we have to return to Victorian London. In 1888, London was the largest city on Earth, the capital of the British Empire, a place where industry, science, and commerce were transforming the modern world. But only a short walk from the financial district, another city existed, Whitechapel. While the West End celebrated prosperity, the East End struggled simply to survive. More than 80,000 people lived within just over a square mile. Entire families crowded into a single rented room. Casual laborers lined up every morning hoping to find work for the day. Many recent immigrants had arrived seeking opportunity, only to find overcrowding, disease, and grinding poverty. After sunset, coal smoke mixed with the autumn fog until the streets seemed to disappear. Gas lamps illuminated only a few yards ahead. The smell of horses, sewage, damp brick, and factory smoke hung permanently in the air. To outsiders, Whitechapel was a place to avoid. To the people who lived there, it was simply home. And it was here, in one of the poorest corners of the richest city in the world, that a series of murders would change history forever. History remembers 5 women as the canonical victims. Mary and Nichols, killed on August 31st. Annie Chapman, September 8th. Elizabeth Stride, September 30th. Less than an hour later, Catherine Eddowes. And finally, Mary Jane Kelly, November 9th. Their names are often recited as a list, but they were far more than entries in a police file. Mary and Nichols had once worked as a domestic servant before financial hardship overtook her life. Annie Chapman struggled with chronic illness after the breakdown of her marriage, yet friends remembered her generosity. Elizabeth Stride had emigrated from Sweden hoping for a fresh start in England. Catherine Eddowes was known for her quick wit and her ability to make people laugh, even during difficult times. Mary Jane Kelly, believed to be the youngest of the 5, dreamed of leaving Whitechapel and beginning again somewhere new. Each had a life before history reduced them to victims. Remembering that matters, because the story of Jack the Ripper isn't only about an unidentified killer. It's also about 5 women whose identities were gradually overshadowed by the myth that followed. As the murders continued, fear spread well beyond Whitechapel. People altered their routines. Shopkeepers closed earlier. Women avoided walking alone after dark whenever they could. Rumors circulated through markets, pubs, and factory floors faster than official statements. Then the newspapers joined the story. Publications competed fiercely for readers, and every new development offered an opportunity to sell more copies. Confirmed facts appeared alongside speculation. Witness accounts mixed with rumor. The public wasn't simply reading about an investigation anymore. They were following it almost in real time, debating suspects and sharing theories long before detectives had reached any conclusions of their own. Without realizing it, Victorian Britain was witnessing something entirely new. Crime had become serialized, and the unknown killer at its center was slowly becoming something larger than a fugitive. He was becoming a legend. But while London was consumed by headlines, the detectives investigating the case faced a much harsher reality. They weren't chasing a criminal who had left clues behind. They were chasing someone who seemed to leave almost nothing at all. And in 1888, that made solving the case nearly impossible. By the autumn of 1888, Whitechapel had become one of the most heavily patrolled neighborhoods in London. The Metropolitan Police increased patrols throughout the East End. Detectives questioned hundreds of witnesses, searched lodging houses, followed anonymous tips, and investigated anyone whose behavior seemed remotely suspicious. Leading the investigation was Commissioner Sir Charles Warren, while Inspector Frederick Aberline, an experienced detective who knew Whitechapel well, spent countless hours interviewing residents and trying to separate fact from rumor. The problem wasn't a lack of effort, it was a lack of evidence. Today, investigators can reconstruct crimes through DNA, fingerprints, CCTV footage, mobile phone records, and digital timelines. In 1888, none of those tools existed. Blood typing had not yet entered criminal investigations. Fingerprint identification would not be adopted in Britain for another decade. Crime scenes were rarely secured, and forensic science was still in its infancy. Curious bystanders often wandered through areas investigators hoped would provide clues, unintentionally contaminating evidence before it could even be examined. Looking back with modern eyes, it's easy to ask why the police failed. The more difficult question is whether anyone could have solved the case using the tools available at the time. That question became even more urgent on the night of September 30th, 1888. Just after 1 o'clock in the morning, Elizabeth Stride was found in Dutfield's yard. Unlike the previous murders, investigators believe the killer may have been interrupted before carrying out the same sequence of injuries seen in earlier attacks. Police were still responding to the scene when another message arrived. Less than an hour later, nearly a mile away in Mitre Square, Catherine Eddowes was discovered. The timing stunned investigators. If the same person had committed both murders, he had escaped one crime scene, crossed part of central London on foot, killed again, and disappeared before officers had any chance of closing the area. From that moment on, the press gave the night a name that history still remembers: the double event. It transformed the investigation. Whoever the killer was, he appeared calm under pressure, familiar with the streets, and capable of vanishing into one of the busiest cities in the world. As officers searched nearby streets before dawn, they discovered a blood-stained piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron in the entrance of a building on Golston Street. Above it, written in chalk, was a short message. Today, it's known as the Golston Street Graffito. The exact wording has been debated for generations because the writing no longer exists. Before sunrise, Commissioner Warren ordered it erased, fearing it could trigger anti-Jewish violence in an already tense neighborhood. Historians still argue over that decision. Did he destroy one of the investigation's most important clues, or did he prevent a riot? There is no definitive answer, only another layer of uncertainty added to an already unsolved case. As weeks turned into months, the list of suspects continued to grow. Some were identified through witness statements, others through rumor. Many simply fit the public's idea of what a killer should look like. Over the years, more than 100 names have been proposed, but only a handful remain central to serious historical discussion. Montague Druitt, a barrister whose death shortly after the murders attracted the attention of later investigators. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish-born barber whose name appears in surviving police memoranda and remains one of the most debated suspects. Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American self-proclaimed doctor who came under police scrutiny while in London and fled to France, then the United States, after being released on unrelated charges. Michael Ostrog, a career criminal known for fraud and deception. And George Chapman, later convicted of poisoning 3 women, leading some investigators to wonder whether he had begun his criminal career decades earlier. None has ever been conclusively linked to the murders. In many ways, the list of suspects tells us as much about Victorian society as it does about the investigation itself.
Immigrants,
Foreigners, doctors, gentlemen, the mentally ill. Each theory reflected the fears and assumptions of the era that produced it. But here's what makes this case so unusual. The lack of evidence didn't weaken the mystery. It strengthened it. Every unanswered question created room for another theory. Every missing clue invited another suspect. And perhaps that's why, more than a century later, people are still convinced they're the ones who can finally solve it. Psychologists have long observed that uncertainty changes the way we perceive danger. A known threat has boundaries. An unknown one does not. When information is incomplete, the human brain naturally begins filling the gaps. Sometimes it does so with logic. More often, it relies on imagination, intuition, and fear. That helps explain what happened in Whitechapel. Ordinary people started seeing suspicious strangers everywhere. Rumors spread faster than official statements. Witnesses became increasingly confident in memories that often contradicted one another. The mystery no longer belonged only to the police. It belonged to the public. And once that happened, Solving the case became only part of the story. The mystery itself had become the attraction. But while Scotland Yard searched desperately for the man behind the murders, someone else had already discovered something even more valuable. The mystery could be solved, because before Jack the Ripper became history's most famous unidentified killer, he became the world's first true media phenomenon. As Scotland Yard struggled to identify the killer, Britain's newspapers discovered something else entirely. The investigation had become front-page news. Every new rumor sold papers. Every witness account generated fresh headlines. Every unanswered question kept readers coming back the next morning. Publications competed fiercely to break the next development, often printing speculation alongside verified facts. One newspaper in particular, The Star, helped fuel public fascination by publishing dramatic accounts of the murders, turning an already terrifying investigation into a national obsession. For the first time, millions of people weren't simply reading about crime. They were following it almost as if it were a serialized story. Without realizing it, Victorian Britain had begun changing the relationship between journalism and criminal investigation. The mystery itself had become part of the product. Then the letters began to arrive. Police stations and newspaper offices received hundreds of them. Most claimed to have inside knowledge. Some claimed responsibility. Most historians believe the overwhelming majority were hoaxes, written by attention seekers or individuals hoping to insert themselves into history. But one letter changed everything. The Dear Boss letter. Whether it came from the killer or not is still impossible to prove. What mattered was the signature, Jack the Ripper. Until that moment, the murders had no single identity in the public imagination. Now they had a name. Weeks later came another infamous piece of correspondence, the From Hell letter, mailed with half of a preserved human kidney. Its authenticity remains fiercely debated. Some researchers believe it may have been genuine. Others argue it was another carefully staged deception. More than a century later, no consensus exists. Ironically, even the documents that define the legend have become part of the mystery themselves. The murders officially ended in 1888. The story never did. Every generation has produced a new suspect, a new theory, a new book promising the final answer. In recent years, documentaries, podcasts, best-selling books, and even disputed DNA claims have once again reignited debate, each suggesting the mystery may finally have been solved. Yet historians remain deeply divided. Perhaps that isn't surprising. An unsolved mystery is uniquely powerful because it invites participation. It asks every generation to believe that this time, the answer might finally be within reach. If any of this feels familiar, that's because we're still doing exactly what Victorian readers did. We binge documentaries. We listen to true crime podcasts on the way to work. We scroll through online discussions where thousands of strangers debate evidence from cases that are decades, or even centuries, old. The technology has changed. The audience hasn't. So why has this particular story endured? Not because it claimed the most lives. Didn't. Not because it was the most complex criminal investigation in history. It wasn't. It survived because it sits at the intersection of three forces that still shape our lives today: fear, curiosity, and uncertainty. Earlier, we asked why we're still searching for Jack the Ripper. Perhaps the answer has very little to do with the killer himself. Psychologist Carl Jung once argued that the parts of ourselves we struggle to confront don't disappear. They simply retreat into what he called the shadow. Stories like this allow us to approach those fears from a safe distance, not to celebrate violence, but to understand why it unsettles us so deeply. Perhaps that's why every new generation returns to Whitechapel, not only to solve a mystery, but to better understand the minds that created it, and the minds still captivated by it. The legacy of Jack the Ripper isn't a name. It's a warning about what happens when poverty is ignored, when fear spreads faster than facts, when sensationalism becomes more profitable than truth, and when tragedy slowly transforms into entertainment. Those forces didn't disappear with Victorian London. They evolved. Today they travel through algorithms instead of newspapers, through notifications instead of headlines, through endless feeds instead of crowded street corners. The setting has changed. Human nature has not. On the morning of September 30th, 1888, Constable Edward Watkins entered Mitre Square searching for answers. He found another victim. He never found the killer. In many ways, neither have we. Perhaps that's why we continue returning to Whitechapel. Not because history left us without a name, but because it left us with a question. What is it about fear that refuses to let us look away? Maybe the greatest mystery was never Jack the Ripper. Maybe it has always been the human mind.